about science, art, and creativity. So science and art are widely regarded as these two distinct disciplines, but there's a very interesting intersection, and that's why we are all here, right? And I think creativity might be one important factor connecting the two domains. And it's a very interesting playground, both from an intuitive and like intellectual perspective. And what's interesting about science, science has many faces, if you want so. So on the one side, science is a rational, logical endeavor where emotions are not necessarily wanted. You shouldn't be guided too much by your intuition for arriving at your scientific conclusions. On the other hand, science is a very colorful process, and most great discoveries, or you probably can relate from the lab, are very much intuition driven. So an interesting question to pose is whether science is inherently creative or not. Because one might argue that what scientists do is studying reality and making an attempt at deriving a model from their observation, which allows us to understand or predict reality better. So one could say that scientists rather discover the pre-existing laws of nature instead of inventing them, which would make it, one might argue, not an inherently creative endeavor. So let's have one close look at what science does, or the output. If you think about the famous scientific theories, in biology, probably the most famous, the theory of evolution by Darwin. This is probably one of the best tested theories of all time because so many biological studies indirectly also test evolution, and it never failed to pass the test. So you might say this is kind of a universally valid law of nature. But in the end, the classic Darwinian theory of evolution also has its limits. It cannot explain the origin of life, it cannot explain epigenetics or horizontal gene transfer. So there are scenarios in which the theory of evolution is not valid, even though this being the best tested theory of all time, one might say. If we think about physics, for example, Newton's law of gravity, one could say that's pretty solid. There's not much room for interpretation or speculation here. And it is very solid at a certain scale. If things get very big or very small, then Newton's law of gravity breaks down. So also here, it's only a specific framework within which this model is valid. And the last example from mathematics, like the Pythagoras theorem, one could say mathematics is really pure, logically speaking. And even if you would go to the other end of the universe and you would find an alien planet and they would have alien mathematicians, they would probably have arrived at the same theorem with a different name, but this could be a universally valid idea. But also here, it's actually only true in two-dimensional space. And when things get very big or very small, it breaks down. So in the end, all these super helpful theories, they are just models. And what models are, they are representations of reality, but not reality itself. And this is why I would argue that science is inherently creative, because we don't really uncover the very essence of things, but we creatively generate models which allow us the best possible description of what's really going on. And one sometimes undervalued part of the creative scientific process is the visual part. So I would like to share some examples of what are to me some of the most powerful science visuals I know, and what significance visualization can play for the scientific process as such. So this one, all-time classic, one of the first scribbles of Darwin, where he basically sketched out the tree of life with this charming note of "I think" on top of it. This is a technically not very elaborate drawing, but it encapsulates the very essence of his idea. And it's a very, very powerful concept that is basically boiled down into this simple visual, which really, this visual contains the essence of the theory of evolution. Another classic is, this is one of the first sketches of the DNA double helix that was ever drawn by Francis Crick in a letter to a friend when he made this discovery. And the idea of Francis Crick wanting to share his discovery with a friend, the best way was to just sketch it out and draw the first sketch of a DNA double helix, the secret of life, basically. One that's very famous among biologists is Waddington's landscape, and it's also an evergreen. It's basically used to develop the sequential reduction of developmental potential when a cell progresses throughout development. So you have this ball in the beginning, and the ball rolls down the hill, but it can go in different valleys. And once you make a certain decision, you have still different decisions downstream, but you cannot go to the other valley. And I feel every generation of biologists discovers this visual new because it keeps being valid in many different contexts. And it's just a brilliant, brilliant way to express this idea and to make it accessible. So every visualization is more than just drawing out something and making a doodle. It's a hypothesis in itself. And it's an art to contain a complex idea or to basically manifest a complex idea in a simple drawing. And the way I like to think about it is that basically the way our brains work, it's not like we have articulated thoughts in our brains, right? Our brain is this dark matter, and we have diffuse ideas which are at all times competing with for the attention of the consciousness. And only when we articulate our thoughts, they become clear to us. And the most common way to articulate thoughts, as the verb says, is by putting them into language, by putting them into words. Basically, what you do, you take a diffuse thought, you drag it out of the diffusion, you fit it into a concretely defined concept, enabling you to think clearly about it. And the whole messy thing can basically be fit into an understandable concept by articulating it. And I would argue that visualization is just a different way of articulation than words. It's a different way to express the diffuse thoughts we have in our brain. And it can be a very helpful way if you want to think clearly about certain concepts. So what do you need to bring to the table? What's interesting that the skills that make a good artist and a good scientist, there's a strong overlap. First of all, it's very helpful to be a careful and receptive observer of reality. Just the ability to observe something and really take it in. That's a very, very important skill, both as a scientist and an artist. You need to have the technical proficiency. You need to know how to pivot your experiments or to use your tools, whether it's a paintbrush or Photoshop or whatever is your jam. So the technical proficiency is also what both classes need. And finally, you have to have a feeling for communication. In the end, it's all communication, right? And this is luckily something that we are not born with, but something you can train. So in the end, it's about a careful observer who's technically proficient and has an intuitive feel for communication will probably be a good scientist and a good artist. And one objection that I often hear, very often, that when I talk with people from science about this, that they figure that they say, I can't draw. So I think that's all cool and interesting, but I can't draw, so I'm kind of out. And that's bullshit. It's not, or it's an unnecessary self-limiting belief, because in the end, you don't need to be able to draw very well to transform a concept into some artistic expression. And in fact, there are many, many different media how you can go about it, right? Photography. If you're into microscopy, then this is, in a way, it's photography. And microscopy is I love microscopy. I love doing fluorescent microscopy. And it's some images are an art form in itself. Music or embroidery. There are people who do lovely science embroidery. Working with a laptop or with a computer. I would say I can draw okay, but I'm not a good drawer. I do mostly digital stuff. And I wouldn't consider myself a good drawer, but this is no objection in order to do art. Also with AI, it's interesting because it empowers people who didn't develop the technical proficiency to manifest their ideas, and you can basically just try out whatever you have in mind. So I would encourage you to just when you have a cool idea, find a different way to express it, and it will be a very exciting and new way also to think about your science. And what's cool about today's lineup, that given the different takes of all the speakers, maybe you're inspired for how to go about a certain topic. Now a couple of words about how I got here. I'm a geneticist. I'm a C. elegans geneticist by training. I did my PhD in PostDoc in Vienna. And then during my PhD, my side job was doing freelance science illustrations. Now I'm a full-time science artist since about 2 years now. And yeah, originally I come from Vienna studying worms. I spent 10 years of my life learning about life from little nematodes. was an awesome time. I loved it. I love science. I loved the lab. But the academic career was not quite a good fit for me for personal reasons. So yeah, I did the switch to art, science themed. And very originally, I come from street art. So this is what I was painting 15 years ago. And then I started painting worms at some point. It was interesting because the elegans community had a lot of love for the graffiti worms. So this was one of my first pieces, which encouraged me to actually go more in this direction because people were really appreciative. Yeah, in my postdoc, I was working in ubiquitin, so that's a protein structure. Protein structures have an inherent interesting aesthetic. It's almost like they're designed to look good. I love the design dynamic of this ubiquitin fold. Most of the jobs I do, or the most interesting ones, are typically covers, because covers allow you to get really creative and come up with an abstract idea. So that's one I did recently with a lab in Italy. And it's a mosaic, it's a real mosaic. And whoops. Basically, we put together the real mosaic and then build it into a frame and build a lamp behind it. So you can illuminate it at night, and then you see the rain colored in different colors, highlighting different nature of the cell types. That was a fun thing to do. And yeah, here we have one more. This is a take of cell biology in Kandinsky style, if you want so. So Kandinsky has this very intriguing geometric language, which kind of makes a good fit for depicting cell biology. Here we see the nuclear envelope and certain connections to the ER. So this was for a paper which found out that the connections from envelope to ER are hourglass shaped, and this illustration was to highlight this shape. And yeah, here's one. Structural biology lends itself to beautiful aesthetics inherently. This was an illustration about disassembly of the spliceosome. So it turns out to disassemble the spliceosome, which has to be a very strong complex to do the job, but as soon as the job of splicing two exons together is done, it should immediately disassemble. How is this achieved? By a protein which pulls in one of the central RNA compounds, which is kind of the scaffold, and everything falls apart. So this is what this illustration means. And yeah, just to give you a taste of what I do. And a short note on the side, if you're interested in science freelancing, if you think about transitioning to a science freelancing career, part-time or full-time at some point in the future, because many people often ask me for advice, I decided to, together with Daria Kroborg, good friend and colleague of mine, put together a course about science freelancing. If this is interesting for you, check it out. We launch in May also. But yeah, without further ado, thank you all for coming. Thank you that yeah, you're interested in this topic and joined. It means a lot to me. And I'm gonna pass it on to the next speaker, Trisha Bonya, also a very talented artist and good friend of mine. She's a trained biotechnologist, did her PhD in biophysics, and is known mainly for doing scientific video games. A very cool way of science communication, I think. But yeah, she also does illustrations, animations, and without further ado, I'm gonna pass it on to Patricia. Yes, see you later.